The Sega Saturn is often referred to today as a failure, a hyped-up machine that didn't carry Sega's successes from the Genesis into the rest of the 90s. But that doesn't mean they didn't try. If the late 90s only bring back memories of the PlayStation or N64, then you missed out on a Sega Saturn game that equaled the best Sony and Nintendo had to offer, Nights into Dreams. The full story is here and ready to fly. On July 5, 1996, Sega debuted Nights into Dreams on the Saturn in Japan, along with an all-new controller designed for it. It was the product of many decisions and reactions that occurred before and during its development. And though it may not have been the biggest game of the era, for Sega fans especially, it is one worth remembering. It all began in 1994. The company was at its peak, riding a long plateau that began in 1991 with Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic in '94 was so epic, it had to be released in two parts. Sonic 3 in February, then Sonic & Knuckles in October. It was also the year that truly started the next generation. Sega and Sony both released their 32-bit CD-ROM hardware, the Saturn and PlayStation, at the end of 1994. In those first few weeks, Sega came out on top, outselling Sony by a few 100,000 units. Though on the ground, things were very competitive, and it was still anybody's ballgame. In the US, the team that developed Sonic 2 and 3, the Sega Technical Institute, STI for short, continued their focus on Genesis games. But everyone involved knew there wasn't much more the Blue Blur could do on 16-bit. It was the perfect time for those involved to go their separate ways. In early 1995, Yuji Naka carried the Sonic Team moniker with him back to Japan and reunited with other original team members, Naoto Oshima, aka Big Island, the original designer of the Sonic the Hedgehog character, and Takashi Iizuka, who was working with Yuji Naka at STI on S3 and K. Together, they began to work on a new game for the Saturn, something that could redefine games in a way that Sonic had not that long ago. Initial drafts envisioned a game that was airborne, had a slower pace, and featured characters that were more innocent and genuine. You could thank the success of Sonic for having such creative freedom. Without that pedigree, any team would have had a game dictated to them without much input. Initially, a 2D gameplay style with hand-drawn sprites was on the drawing board. With flight as a core concept, it resembled typical shoot-'em-ups too closely, leading to a redesign using a 3D graphical style with polygons. 3D gameplay as a whole was still very new, without hard and fast rules for what a game should be. The control system would be understood as 2D movement, while 3D graphics covered up the traditional XY axis. Years later, the term 2.5D would emerge to explain styles like this. With a graphical format pinned down, the stories and characters of this world began to take shape. With a fresh new concept on new hardware, Naoto Oshima let his imagination run wild with ideas that would create the backdrop for an all-new game, crafting two worlds that exist beyond reality as we know it. NiGHTopia, a land where dreams are played out every night, paired with the world of Nightmare where our worst fears come to life. NiGHTopia is the home to peaceful creatures known as Nightopians, but they are constantly threatened by invaders from Nightmare, known as the Nightmaren. They serve the evil ruler, Wise Man the Wicked, whose ambition is to gather enough dream energy to extend his control beyond dreams and into reality. In our world, two teenagers, Elliot Edwards and Clarice Sinclair, are experiencing troubles in their daily lives. Elliot is struggling after losing an important basketball championship, while Clarice is overwhelmed by the pressure of an upcoming singing performance. Their fears, doubts, and insecurities leave them vulnerable to the Nightmaren as they fall asleep. At the heart of every dream lies an idea, a crystal sphere representing a person's spirit. 5 ideas exist, each embodying a different aspect of the human heart: white for purity, green for wisdom, blue for intelligence, yellow for hope, and the rare red idea, which represents courage. While most people only possess the 4 common ideas, Elliot and Clarice each carry a red idea, making them especially valuable to wise men. In Nightmare reside 2 very powerful Nightmaren, Riala and Knights. Riala is fiercely loyal to wise men, while Knights has rebelled, refusing to carry out any more orders. As punishment, Knights is imprisoned inside an idea capture deep within NiGHTopia. When Elliot and Clarice unknowingly free Knights, the 3 join forces to recover the stolen ideas before Riala and Wiseman can use their power to expand Nightmare beyond the dream world. In Nights into Dreams, there are 7 levels known as Dreams, each divided into 4 sections called mares. Every mare begins with Elliot or Claris exploring the dream world on foot. Their objective is to recover an idea, spheres representing human emotions that were stolen from them at the beginning of the game. Each idea is sealed inside a floating chamber called an idea capture. Destroying the idea capture releases both the stolen idea and Knights, who merges with Elliot or Claris through a process called dualize. As Knights, the player is free to fly through looping 3-dimensional courses. Knights must return the recovered idea before the time runs out, but the real challenge lies in how efficiently you get there. Rings, chips, enemies, tricks, and hidden bonuses are all worth points, and linking them together without interruption creates score chains. One of Knights' abilities is the Paraloop, performed by flying in a complete circle. This swirling trail can defeat enemies, activate switches, collect nearby items, and reveal hidden bonuses. Flying is limited by a countdown timer called Link Time. Taking damage reduces the remaining time, while collecting blue chips and blue chip bonuses extends it. If the timer expires, Elliot or Claris separate from Knights and fall back to the ground, forcing the player to reunite with Knights again. Success in Nights into Dreams isn't measured by simply reaching the goal. It's about discovering the most efficient route through the dream and maintaining an uninterrupted chain of links from beginning to end. At the end of each mare, the player receives a grade ranging from A to F. While earning an A rank requires mastering the game's mechanics, only a C grade is needed to unlock each character's final dream. In addition to the main adventure, Nights into Dreams includes a competitive mode where 2 players, one as Knights and one as Reala, compete within a time limit. Sonic Team also created something novel for the game and impossible before the Saturn: A-Life, a simulated evolutionary system where Nightopians evolve over time. The more the game is played, the more active A-Life becomes. Environments will change, different Nightopians will appear, and in bigger numbers. The music, which was already awesome, changes its pitch, tempo, and melody, depending on the mood of the Nightopians at the time. All of it relies on the internal clock that's always running in the Saturn, combined with some kind of unexplained magic. The entire project took about 1 year. The first few months were devoted to planning and design, after which development shifted gears to programming and testing. Along the way, the outside world was hardly static. Nintendo made news by formally announcing the Nintendo 64 and demonstrating its controller, which featured an analog stick in the center for precise movement in 3D environments. Seeing that this was the direction the world was heading, the final version of Knights was programmed with analog controls in mind. Sega developed an all-new controller with an analog stick and analog triggers. The form factor was also bigger and had handles for better comfort. Formally, it was named the Multi-Controller in Japan and the 3D Control Pad in the US, but in the prototype stages, it earned a funny nickname, the Spielberg Controller, named after filmmaker Steven Spielberg, who had visited Sega during development, unrelated to Knights itself, while exploring options to branch out into new media. In the early months of 1996, another problem hit Sega, as Square announced that it would be leaving Nintendo to produce Final Fantasy VII solely for the PlayStation. Just the announcement led to a jump in PlayStation sales, wherein Sega fell to number 2 in overall next-generation hardware sales. As that gap widened, third-party games designed with the Saturn in mind, like Tomb Raider and Mega Man 8, suddenly had PlayStation versions in development, giving customers less of a reason to go with Sega. More so in the US and the UK, where the Saturn was running behind from the start. It all meant that Nights into Dreams had to deliver, becoming the make-or-break game for Sega and the Saturn. When it was ready to roll in the summer of 1996, Nights into Dreams took its first flight, ready to prove itself to the world.
Sega マルチコントローラーで私はナイツになる。
フライングファンタジーナイツ7月5日
飛べた。
記念セット限定発売。
When Nights into Dreams went out around the world, the release was overshadowed by the forthcoming Nintendo 64. Each region of the world positioned NiGHTS and its marketing differently to brace for the best outcome possible. The press for the new Saturn game was positive. NiGHTS Into Dreams received a Famitsu cross-review score of 34 out of 40. The team remarked that the game feels fresh and new, like playing Sonic for the first time. That aiming for an A ranking unlocks many little joys, in the way that Mario games usually do. And that even though you can't freely move around, the feeling of being in flight is fun and refreshing. After mastering the control scheme, Famitsu further covered NiGHTS with detailed strategies on how to achieve the fastest times and A rankings in a few dreams, though the staff found mapping out the actual levels was too difficult. In Japan, NiGHTS went on sale on July 5th, 1996, 12 days after Super Mario 64. It was thought best by Sega to just step aside and let Nintendo sell their game, then hit back with NiGHTS afterwards. It's been proven true that every time a new video game hardware debuts in Japan, people line up overnight, stores sell hundreds of thousands of units, and everything else on sale that day suffers. When NiGHTS debuted on July 5th, the game was sold with the analog controller as a package set for 7,800 yen, about $70 at the time, or just the game itself for 5,800 yen, about $52. The controller was also sold separately for 3,800 yen, about $34. The sales performance of the game is something not often remembered, but should be. NiGHTS Into Dreams knocked Super Mario 64 from the top spot, becoming the #1 seller for that week. Despite hundreds of thousands of new N64s being sold that summer, and Mario 64 being only one of 3 games to go with it, NiGHTS maintained its lead over Mario throughout the summer of '96, even after its time on top was over. In the US, NiGHTS made a huge splash at that year's E3 Expo, with a giant crescent moon and rings hanging over the floor space. It led to very positive coverage as the summer months rolled on, leading up to release in August '96, about 1 month before the N64 was ready. Die-hard game fan embraced the game with several full-page previews, celebrating Sonic Team's grand return. NiGHTS took the cover in the August issue, accompanied by a full review inside. Despite the staff disliking the unconventional capitalization of NiGHTS, the article praised the game as one of a small handful of games that is truly something you've never played before, with emphasis on how the best 32-bit games will go beyond simply being a 3D version of an older 2D game, which NiGHTS clearly does. Analog controls are a must, with the best review for the 3D pad ever printed. Simply stating, Sega's pad is everything that the N64 controller should have been. The cover feature closes by asking, how well will NiGHTS compete with Crash Bandicoot and Mario 64 when all 3 are on the store shelves side by side? The Viewpoint score followed in September with a rating of 97%. Some of the talk about the gameplay, control, and graphics is touched upon, but most of the space was taken up to stress that it was unfair to compare NiGHTS to Mario 64, as both were very different games from each other. Furthermore, introducing a new character with a unique game as the new face of Sega, rather than delivering the next Sonic, was a bold and brave choice, and that while that might be a letdown at first, NiGHTS has a chance to be its own game that was worth taking a new direction for. Electronic Gaming Monthly issued a score of 32 out of 40 in September 1996. The review crew said that NiGHTS was a pretty cool game that pushed the Saturn to the limit, with surreal music and a cast of interesting characters. Though the crew felt that the game fell short of being a Mario killer, citing the length of the game and lack of free-roaming 3D. GamePro gave an almost perfect score in October 1996. The review touched on all the points said in other publications, but also offered many pro tips to access hidden areas, how to shave off valuable seconds to reach an A rank, and the weaknesses of certain bosses that can be exploited for an easy win. NiGHTS Into Dreams was backed by a $10 million marketing push. A full ad campaign hit the airwaves in August 1996, ripping the PlayStation and its inability to fly. After the N64 saw release, a second advertisement was shown with NiGHTS as part of a highlight reel of games, alongside taking a shotgun to Nintendo's new machine. NiGHTS was unfortunately shut out of the closest thing gaming has ever had to the Oscars. Electronic Gaming Monthly's End of the Year awards. Super Mario 64 took home Game of the Year, while on individual platforms, Dragon Force by Working Designs was awarded Best Saturn Game. It wasn't all bad though. NiGHTS won the Reader's Poll for Best Saturn Game, and the 3D Gamepad won Best Peripheral over the ugly N64 controller. In the UK and Europe, Sega got the early jump on Nintendo, releasing NiGHTS in September 1996, before the N64 was planned to go on sale. However, a stroke of pure luck helped Sega in the region. Nintendo delayed the N64 until March 1997. The squeeze felt in America would not happen across the pond, even though Sega was still in second place. The official Sega Saturn magazine gave NiGHTS Into Dreams a score of 96%, while Computer and Video Games magazine gave a perfect 5 out of 5. Both reviews heavily commented on the A-Life system, something American reviewers seemed oblivious to. Saturn magazine said it was jolly to watch the NiGHTopians evolve under this system, while CVG called NiGHTS a living game and found that the system can produce things in the game that Sega never intended to happen, as well as calling NiGHTS the perfect evolution of a Sonic game. The sales for NiGHTS Into Dreams were fairly substantial. The game made HMV's bestseller list for the year. And at least for 1996, the final scorecard officially read, Sega 1, Nintendo 0.
There's never been a game like Sega Saturn's NiGHTS. Never been a game that's allowed you to fly, fluid and free, in real-time 3D. Never, not anywhere. But especially not on that other system. Simply because, with only one processor, it doesn't have the power to do it. Fly, Plaything, fly. You're not ready. Stay up!
NiGHTS Into Dreams proved that the Saturn could deliver a unique next-generation experience, and that Sega was still a major player in what was now a three-way race. Sega quickly capitalized on the wave NiGHTS was riding in 1996. Sega introduced Christmas NiGHTS Into Dreams in December 1996. It wasn't a full game, but more like an expansion pack. After their original outing, Elliot and Claris team up with NiGHTS again to return the stolen Christmas star from Gilwing. The game itself is a single level, Claris's Spring Valley Dream, with a new coat of paint. Item boxes are now Christmas presents, rings are wreaths, snow covers the ground, NiGHTopians wear elf uniforms, and the music is changed to Jingle Bells, along with a choral rendition of the original NiGHTS theme. Sometimes you might catch Santa's sleigh flying in the sky. As Christmas NiGHTS wasn't a full game, it was never sold at retail. Instead, the game was given away for free to new Saturn owners in Japan that December. In the US, it came free with select Saturn games. In the UK, Sega Saturn magazine gave the game away in several issues. For those who got the game in December, it was a fun little diversion, but what most didn't know was that Christmas NiGHTS was the gift they kept on giving all year round. The Christmas theme wasn't hard-coded into the game, but rather dictated by the Saturn's internal clock. When New Year's Day came around, the Christmas decorations came down, but the dream was still set in winter. On April Fool's Day, Riala is playable instead of NiGHTS, and once unlocked, Riala can be selected anytime. Other days of the year unlock even more secrets, though for about 250 days a year, the game plays like the standard NiGHTS. There are other smaller Easter eggs as well, like a music player where you can create your own mixes, and if you make a pair of Sonic cards in the memory matching minigame, you can unlock Sonic Into Dreams, where the most famous hedgehog in the world takes on Dr. Robotnik, set to remixed music from Sonic CD. Plans for a true sequel were underway, with a project titled Air NiGHTS. The game started on the Saturn, then moved to the Dreamcast, but never saw the light of day. The game had been talked about publicly, including plans for a motion controller designed just for the game. But for whatever reason, Air NiGHTS never got off the ground. The only other NiGHTS releases from this time were a Tiger LCD handheld version, along with one for the R-Zone. Neat, but not what anyone was looking for. Also, while things were rather quiet for Sega in 1998, a Nights into Dreams comic published by Archie arrived on the scene for anyone who's still stuck by Sega in the Saturn's final days. The series began with a 3-part miniseries that closely followed the in-game events, followed by a second and third series that continued the adventures of Elliot and Clarice. Yuji Naka and Sonic Team had later moved on to what the public had always wanted, a 3D Sonic with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. The team's non-Hedgehog focus went towards Phantasy Star Online, the first online RPG for a home TV game. After the Dreamcast gave up the ghost in 2001, Phantasy Star Online moved to the GameCube and brought a Knights-related Easter egg with it. If you were somehow bored enough and rich enough to connect a Game Boy Advance to a GameCube running PSO, you could play Nights into Dreams Score Attack, a minigame of Nights presented in an endless loop. It also worked if you had Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. Even though a few Saturn games were ported to Windows PCs in the 90s, Nights into Dreams wasn't one of them. However, there was a scaled-down Shockwave version of the game that was playable on Sega.com in 1997. This version is very simple and strictly 2D. It might come close to the original idea for Nights before the game embraced 3D graphics. As for a proper PC version of Nights, that happened in Japan in 2003 as part of Sega Game Honpo, an online service available at internet cafes throughout Japan. Game Honpo was discontinued over 20 years ago, but if you remember GameTap, which Sega was very gung-ho about as well, they weren't too dissimilar. The idea of Air Nights was resurrected by one of the last remaining faces from the glory days. Takashi Iizuka brought back Nights in 2007 on the Wii with Nights Journey of Dreams, complete with motion controls, as was originally envisioned all those years ago. The story takes place in a fictionalized London, England, the city of Belbridge, where William and Helen are dragged into the world of Nightopia by the Nightmarean. Heavy British influences run throughout the game, serving as a contrast to the Sonic series, which is set in America. All voice acting features British accents, and the clock tower is a wonderful homage to the Great Clock of Westminster, known today as Elizabeth Tower. Journey of Dreams also had its own PC minigame, this time rendered in Flash with Link Challenge, another fun but small diversion. The sequel helped raise the profile of the original. Many players had never owned a Saturn, and over time the original game had made several best-of lists by online reviewers. That led to a full remaster of Nights into Dreams on the PlayStation 2 in 2008, offering full 16:9 widescreen gameplay or the option to go classic Saturn style. The remaster was a Japanese-only release that sold in moderate numbers in the waning days of the PS2. The framework of that version was later carried over to the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Steam for a worldwide audience, casting certainly the widest net Nights had ever seen. In the years that followed, no further remasters, remakes, or sequels appeared. News of anything Nights-related was nearly silent until 2019, when trademarks for Nights began to appear. Fans who were pinning their hopes on an all-new game were let down, as the new Nights in question was a video slot machine titled Dream Wheel. The artwork was amazing, but there wasn't anything about it that you could call a proper Nights game. There was one more chance at a revival when, around the same time, Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima announced that they were teaming up one more time for a new project under Square Enix. The end result was Balan Wonderworld in 2021, a game that somewhat resembled Nights into Dreams, with colorful graphics, whimsical themes, and a story involving a young boy and girl teaming up with a supernatural good guy to fight dark demons. Despite bad reviews of the game and reports of infighting during development, Balan Wonderworld remains the closest thing to a revival of Nights by its core creative staff since 2007. But that doesn't mean Nights disappeared completely. Over the decades, Nights has appeared in the backgrounds of several games and as playable characters in others. In recent years, Sega has begun to open the vault on some of its older franchises. New versions of Shinobi, Jet Set Radio, and Crazy Taxi have been developed in the mid to late 2020s. Which begs the question, if these classic franchises can be reborn one more time, what about Nights? Can there ever be a Nights 3? Well, one can dream.
セガサターン。
プレゼントは何かな。
きっとセガサターンだわ。今買うとクリスマスナイツがついてるんだよね。あなたパパ。
セガサターンはクリスマスナイツキャンペーン。
There are a lot of things you could say about Sega in the late 90s, about the Saturn and the games it had, or didn't have. It's easy to say, do X, Y, and Z to be successful years later, but I try to be more positive and introspective about the era. I often sum it up like this. Every system gets at least one groundbreaking game, one that leaves its mark. Though things didn't turn out as planned, that one game can keep interest in the machine alive decades later, allowing people to look back and say, maybe it really wasn't that bad after all. Nights into Dreams is that game. The mid-90s were an incredible time to live through, watching the industry transition into 3D gaming. A lot of games from the era were jaggy or simply broken, noble experiments that didn't work in practice. But somehow, Nights was different. It was unlike anything else, and it worked. I can also understand why people passed on Nights. Its art style was sincere. It contrasted with the sensibilities of the late 90s. Clowns or jesters or whatever Nights actually is weren't supposed to be cute and pure of heart. They were supposed to be demonic and twisted. That was what people were buying then. By 1996 and certainly by 97, the PlayStation had won the day. Oh yeah, and Mario 64. Everything else tends to disappear into the background. It takes time for things to settle down, then go back and analyze them critically, away from the noise. In hindsight, Nights gets its due, thanks to those who owned it originally and those who were curious enough to try it years later. They both found that Sonic Team could have a masterpiece without its namesake, and that the Saturn did have its one moment in the sun, or maybe I should say moon, to show off what it could do, stun the competition, and stand for years afterward as something worth remembering.